Hey everybody, Jake here from Barely Bearded Gear. As you can see, I got a haircut and trimmed my beard quite a bit. I started work back up this week, kind of. I'm not fully back in the swing of things, but it was requested that I tame it a little bit. So here we are. This is going to be a fun one. I was trying to think of what video I wanted to make today, and I was working all morning and was out in the sun, hence being so red. You're not making me nervous. Don't flatter yourself. But I was working all morning, and I've got some things incoming. I've got some videos I need to shoot, but I want to do a couple of them outdoors. It's been way too long with the fires and how crazy everything's been since I've done a proper outdoor filming session. So hopefully over the next couple of days I'll be able to get out probably into my preferred canyon and do some filming out there on a couple of knives that are due for full reviews. But this is a knife that I have meant to make a video about for so long now. It's made an appearance in my first collection video. I think also my second one, probably, because I showed my whole collection. But this is a knife that was given to me by my dad. And so therefore it has some additional sentimental value beyond its own physical, tangible value. And it's a knife that I carried a lot for a long time. Before I was in the hobby like I am now and I had just a handful of knives, this was the nicest knife I owned for a while as well. So this is the Benchmade Sentinel. The code on it is the 875, I believe. I just looked it up before doing this because I didn't know the blade steel. I didn't know what they originally sold for. There was a lot that I didn't know about it because this is a knife that my dad bought and he carried for a while. And then I just liked it so much and always asked to play with it, and always just I had this kind of draw to it as a younger man, and he was generous enough eventually to, or maybe I wore him down enough that he just gave it to me. I think it was for Christmas one year, and I was thrilled, elated to get this knife. So after that point I carried it a ton. I remember I have a lot of memories using this knife, but I remember specifically like when I started working, like my first real job in retail at PacSun. This was the knife that was in my pocket all the time, and I would do shipments and receive stuff. And I also worked there on the floor, but like at night after we'd close up, I'd have to go and take cardboard out to the dumpster. And this is the knife that would break down boxes for me. And this, there's history between me and this knife. It doesn't really make it in pocket anymore these days because my tastes have certainly radically evolved. This would not be a knife that at this date and time I would pick if I didn't have any sentimental attachment to it. But it's still very nice. And every time that I take a moment to handle this knife, or on those rare occasions where it does make it into pocket again, I always appreciate it. And so it's an interesting one. This knife, it's quite old. You can't get these anymore. This is not a model that's in production. It's actually an Alan Elishewitz design. And it's funny because I have seen his name on this knife for a very long time, but it wasn't until a couple years ago that I became more familiar with who Alan Elishewitz is. And Alan Elishewitz is still a prolific knife designer right now, today. In fact, my buddy Jason just recently got one of his full customs, and it is absolutely stunning. I know he does a lot of the Hogue designs now. He works closely with Hogue, and there are quite a few Elishewitz knives that are being made now. So if you like him as a designer, the Sentinel is not your only option. But yeah, so let's talk about materials a little bit, and then we'll talk about my impressions of this knife. And this is obviously going to be a very long-term review. I have tons of experience with it at this point. So, materials-wise, I had to look up the blade steel because I had no idea, and it is not marked on here anywhere that I can find. According to a site that I found, Some of them just listed as stainless. Like I found an old Blade HQ listing for one of these that they bought from someone's collection and then resold or something, and it just said stainless steel. That could mean a lot of things. So I dug a little deeper, found another site that lists it as ATS 34 stainless steel. I would say I don't have any experience with the steel, but I have a lot of it. I've used this knife a ton, so I have experience with it, but I'm not familiar with its properties or what it compares to on paper or anything like that. Also, at the time that I was using this knife a lot, I didn't have other knives that I would compare it to either. In fact, for years, I used this knife with somewhat regularity without even ever sharpening it. So the edge retention was fair. I had beat up the edge a decent bit, and I finally did have it professionally sharpened a couple of years ago and haven't really used it much since. So it's wearing a pretty good edge at the moment. It's very sharp. Obviously, this is partially serrated, but anyways, it is an ATS 34 stainless steel blade, according to this site. It's on cuttingedge.com, who apparently sold one used for $125. I don't know when, but that's the listing I'm looking at. So then let's talk handle material for a second. This one is actually a titanium liner lock. And so if you can see the blue, all of that blue, those liners are titanium. And I remember thinking that was so cool at the time. Like before this knife was mine and my dad had it, it was like, ooh, it has titanium handles. And that just excited me. I thought that was cool. And titanium is a fantastic knife handle material. So this one is a liner lock. So the liners are titanium. And then you'll see it's kind of a bolster lock-ish. Like if you look at the lock side, you'll see these overlays or these scales are actually split, so you can see down into the titanium, and then they're kind of shadow boxed, so you can see the edge around, and they're like bolted on hardware style. I don't know. It's hard for me to pass a subjective or to pass a judgment on the aesthetics of this knife without being even more subjective than usual, I should say, because I have so much history with this knife that I can't look at it like I would a new knife that came into my possession now. But I kind of think it looks cool having these scales bolted on this way. So yeah, these scales on top of the titanium are actually hard anodized aluminum. So there's black hard anodized aluminum, and then there is titanium underneath it. The back spacer, to me, appears to be plastic, if I'm not mistaken. It's black, and there is a lanyard pin going through it back here, so you could put a lanyard on this knife. I never would. I like that style, though. I'm glad that there's no lanyard hole, and instead it's just tucked away. For those weirdos who want to use it, you can, but for people like me who never will, I don't have to look at a hole in my knife all the time. Anyways, so yeah, like plastic backspacer, polymer. It's made of Glocks. I don't know. I really don't know. But yeah, so aluminum, titanium, plastic, ATS 34 stainless steel according to this website. And then pocket clip is going to be right hand tip down only, kicking it old school. At the time when I carried this knife a lot, I think most of my knives were tip down, right hand only. So now I count that against it. At the time I didn't. I prefer right hand tip up now, if I'm being honest. I also prefer deep carry in a lot of things, which this isn't. But this clip has functioned very well. There was a time when I was getting out of the car and it caught on the seatbelt and bent pretty bad, and I was able to take it off, put it on kind of in reverse, bend it the opposite way, and then put it back on, and it's been great again ever since. So this pocket clip has been through some things, and you can probably see there's a fair bit of wear on it. As with a lot of things on this knife was an absolute user in the pocket all the time EDC knife for me for years, and it was for my dad for a while before it was for me. So this is no safe queen. It's not in immaculate condition, not even close. But yeah, so those are our materials. One thing worth noting as well, this is thumb stud operated, obviously. It rides on washers. I didn't mention that, but I believe they're phosphor bronze. It's actually hard to tell. I don't know that I've ever fully disassembled this knife. It's got to be nasty in there. Just hilarious. I think they're phosphor bronze washers, if I'm not mistaken. They're kind of gunked up and it's a little tough to see. But yeah, it runs on washers. And for how dirty I just realized that it is in there, this thing is actually quite smooth. But these thumb studs, the reason why I brought that up, double as external blade stops. So if you look at the top of the frame or the liners here, you'll see there's that little groove right there. And then much like many knives at this point, but Strider does it, and who else? I feel like, do some Hinderers do it? Yeah. Anyways, much like several other knives, the thumb studs double as the blade stop. So there's no stop pin in here for the tang to rest against. It's just a nice gradual curve in there that looks really pretty, this portion of the blade here. And the stops are external. They are the thumb studs. So I like that. I feel like that's cool. I dig external blade stops for some reason. Maybe it's just because there's not as many of them these days as internal ones, and so it's something a little different. Maybe that's the hipster in me. I don't know. Anyway, I liked external blade stops after they were cool. Is that a hipster thing to say? Yeah, so those are our materials. Let's go from there. Now, if I were to review this knife now, I would probably be pretty mean to it for a number of things, but there are some things that I think I would still like about it. For one, the action on the washers is very good, especially for a knife kind of this era. It feels very smooth to me, and I would be willing to bet if I were to drip a little bit of modern KPL in there, it would get even smoother. But the detent functions really well. I'm not sure what type of detent it is, to be honest. It's probably a stainless steel ball. I really don't know. It almost looks like it's either something milled onto the liner lock interface, or it's so gunked up that it just looks like it's not a ball. I don't know. I'd have to disassemble this knife. But whatever it is, the detent is, I wouldn't describe it as like crisp, like a flipper where it has like a clean break, but it does give me the proper amount of tension for thumb studs. And so I can deploy this knife reliably. I pull it out of the pocket and go to open it up. I don't really have worries that I'm going to fail on deployment. And I'm not using wrist either. I just push straight forward and there she goes. So I like the way the detent is set up for this being on washers with thumb studs. This is a good action even by today's standard. It's not drop shutty, but it's not like, I mean, it's drop shuttier than a Chris Reeve. Anyways, so there's that. The other things that I would say I like about it, if I were reviewing this today with no history with the knife, obviously I can't unwind the clock and actually look at it with fresh eyes, but trying to look at it the way I look at knives now. I like how slim the profile is. More and more, every time I experience a good slim knife in pocket, it reminds me how important it is to me that some knives be nice and slim in pocket, because it's just one of the biggest identifying features of a knife for me that is comfortable to carry. There's a number of things that go into it, the overall size and length and the weight certainly, and the pocket clip and its orientation. All those things kind of add up, but consistently a lot of my favorite knives to have in pocket are knives that are nice and slim this way. That can be a slippery slope, because you go too slim, you start to lose some ergos, and there are repercussions to going super duper slim. But there are knives that are nice and slim that still have good ergos. Maybe not my favorite, but like the TRM Atom is a very slim knife. That makes it fantastic in pocket. And ergonomically, it's a good knife for me still. So this is kind of one of those cases where it's a proper slimness. I like that it's not overly thick and like for no reason. Other than that, based on today's standards and like the way I buy knives, the way I collect knives, the types of knives I'm into today, that's probably kind of about it for what I would really say is super fantastic about it. It's not going to be stupid thick behind the edge, as evidenced by this very tall edge bevel, if it'll focus. The blade finish is very nice. It was a little bit beat up, and the person I had sharpen it actually kind of buffed it a little bit for me, and it's got this nice shine to it now. I do need to clean it up because it's starting to patina a little bit right around the thumb stud where my thumb touches it a lot, but the finish on the blade is nice. It's a cool blade shape, being this spear point with the swedge like it is. I dig that. I think that's cool, at least aesthetically, and as a piercing implement, it's got a strong case. This is a very stabby knife. The things that I now notice about it that I don't love, and part of that is the evolution of my taste. These are things that it's not even fair to say I didn't notice them before, but I was like willfully buying into them and might have even called some of them my preferences at the time, whereas now my taste has evolved. It's become different over time, and that's fair. That will continue to happen. So if I change my tune on a knife at any certain point because my taste has evolved, then consider this your warning. That may happen. Anyways, the biggest thing now that bothers me about this knife, that didn't bother me at all before, is all of the jimping. All of it. There's really only two spots. I guess there's, for some reason, there's also jimping right here. I have no idea what that jimping could be for, other than maybe like when you're pulling it out of your pocket, since it's tipped down. Like right, come on, focus, come on, right here. What is that jimping for? Because when the blade is open, you're not touching that spot. When the blade is closed, I'm guessing it's gotta be so that you can have more grip on the top of the knife in and out of pocket. I don't really see how that's an advantage, but it's there. The other jimping, however, right back here in the most typical jimping place of any knife, other than maybe right here on the spine, but if it's going to be on the handles, it's going to be right there on most knives that you find it on. This jimping is like saw teeth. It is aggressive and sharp and unpleasant to bear down on. A lot of the times when I've used this knife, I've just choked my finger up past that, and then it's not bothersome because I'm not touching it. But when I go like aggressive saber grip, like if I was going to be piercing into a car door cold steel style and channel my inner Lynn Thompson, then my finger would go here and it would lock me in, but it would cut me if I jabbed wrong into something. It's very sharp jimping right there. The other jimping is going to be right here on the kind of this portion of the liners, and it is also too aggressive, too rough. It's just, I don't love it. In terms of accessing the lock bar to disengage the lock, it's great access. The jimping makes sure that I'm not going to slip off of that somehow. But yeah, it's too much jimping. I don't like this jimping one bit. This knife is quite uncomfortable in my hand. And at the time, maybe I hadn't experienced really comfortable knives. Most of the knives that I had and appreciated and liked growing up were like kind of primarily tactically focused knives. Had a lot of cold steels. I grew up in Ventura County and went to their parking lot sale every year. And I think also it's hard for me to say that's what the knives of the time were like, because my field of view was so much narrower than it is now. But I had a lot of knives that had a lot of jimping, and I just thought, jimping is good. I don't feel that way anymore. If you haven't seen me say that before, then you haven't watched many of my videos, because a lot of the times if there's jimping, I complain about it. I don't like jimping unless it really has a good reason to be there, and then it still has to be done very well and still feel pleasant enough in my hand that I'm not going to dislike it. This is what I would consider today bad jimping. Let's think. Other than I guess that's really kind of only thing that actually bothers me about this knife now. Its cutting performance is fine. They made this in a plain edge version. This one happens to be semi-serrated. So I'm not a big serrations guy these days. So if I were getting one of these now, I would get the plain edge one. It's tip down only. That's a bummer. I wish it was tip up. Although I don't specifically wish for this knife to change at all because it's a sentimental piece. I don't need this knife to be different. I'm just trying to thought exercise. Like if I made this knife a knife that I would want to buy and carry and love now, it would probably be a better blade steel. I'd get rid of this jimping. It would be tip up instead of tip down, and then maybe a thinner blade grind would be good. It's not horrible, but behind the edge, it's relatively thick. I like that it's on washers. I like the deployment. I like the action. All of that could stay the same, and I'd still like this knife. I guess there's really not that much that I would change about it, which is kind of impressive for a knife this advanced in years, and that I came into possession of in a time when my taste was so different. It's stood the test of time fairly well. And one thing I keep forgetting to mention, an evidence of how old this Benchmade is that inside the butterfly, where it says, typically it would say Benchmade right there. Come on. I don't know if it's going to focus enough for you to see it, but right there in the butterfly, it says Balisong instead of Benchmade. So at the time, pretty sure Benchmade was primarily just making Balisongs. So they stamped all their blades Balisong. But at Benchmade, I think they still make some Balisongs. I'm not a Bally guy, but I know they've made much more modern ones than they were at this time. But it's an interesting thing that Benchmade was a very different company when this knife came out. So there's that. This has hopefully been a fun one, just kind of whimsical. I didn't have a plan going into this as usual, but just kind of trying to express my thoughts on this one has been an interesting exercise for me, if nothing else. It's an interesting knife. It's one that I imagine there are probably some people out there who, like me, still have one of these kicking around. And it's a cool knife to have in your collection. It's one that every time that I've shown it off, every now and then, I have found people ask me if they can buy it from me. This knife will never be for sale. It's a gift from my dad, and it's kind of a timestamp of an era for me. So this is a forever knife, but I think it's cool that it's almost historical at this point. Obviously, I'm in my late 20s. It's not like this knife is that old, but it's old compared to everything else in my collection. I might have some knives kicking around, like from that box I got out of storage I did a video on not that long ago. Maybe like some junk drawer cold steels that are like crappy old Voyagers or something. I might have had those longer than since my dad first got this. But yeah, this is an aged one in my collection. The most aged one in what I would actually consider like my proper knife collection. What goes in the cases that are my collection. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed checking it out with me. It's an interesting one. So that's the Benchmade Sentinel. Appreciate you guys as always. Sorry for the lack of a beard here. At least I still have some beard. This is more beard than some men will ever grow in their life. Let's be honest. I'm sorry, people who can't grow a beard. I shouldn't be complaining that my beard is smaller, but I wish it was still bigger. Even bigger than it was before. One day I'll just grow a mega beard. Anyways, thanks guys. It's been a long day. I'll talk to you soon.